In 1865, a photographer named James Wallace Black climbed into a hot air balloon tethered above Boston and pointed his camera down at the city below. The exposure took several seconds. The plate glass negative captured street grids, rooftops, shadow angles, and something historians rarely discuss in detail. The buildings were enormous, not tall, but vast. Symmetrical blocks of stone and brick infrastructure that stretched across entire city sections in unified architectural systems. Factories, yes. Mills and warehouses, certainly. But also aqueducts, rail sheds, exhibition halls, and multi-acre glass conservatories that required engineering most towns today could not replicate without cranes, computer-aided design, and poured cement. This photograph was taken 15 years after the California Gold Rush, 2 years after Gettysburg. In the same decade, settlers were still moving west in covered wagons. And yet, when you zoom into these images, what you see is not a pre-industrial society slowly assembling the future. What you see is a civilization already built. Nye. The standard explanation is straightforward. The Industrial Revolution began in Britain in the late 18th century, spread to America and Europe throughout the 19th, and by the 1860s had produced the machinery, labor systems, and capital necessary to construct large-scale urban architecture. Steam power replaced water and animal labor. Factories began producing steel, glass, and standardized building materials. Populations grew, cities expanded. Photographs from this period, we are told, capture the moment when modernity was born. The timeline is clean, the progress is linear, the story makes sense. But the photographs themselves do not always cooperate. They show finished infrastructure that required decades to plan and build, appearing in cities that had barely existed 30 years earlier. They show precision stonework, ornamental iron casting, and gas lighting systems installed across hundreds of miles, all allegedly designed and funded by municipal governments that kept almost no records of the construction process. They show exposition halls and government buildings in frontier territories, where the population was still under 50,000, structures that would be called logistically impossible today without federal funding and multinational contractors. Most importantly, they show no construction. In thousands of photographs taken between 1850 and 1880 across American and European cities, there are almost no images of these large infrastructures being built. There are pictures of them finished, pictures of them in ruins after fires, pictures of them being demolished. But the visual record of their creation is almost entirely missing. What if much of what we see in these photographs was not built during the 19th century at all, but was already there when the settlers arrived, and the story we have been told is a reconstruction written over the evidence after the fact? The hypothesis is not that history is fake, or that buildings appeared from nowhere. It is that the timeline we accept may be a compressed narrative, invented to fit a specific political and economic model of progress, and that the physical infrastructure captured in early photography reflects an earlier, larger, and more technically advanced phase of civilization that was later relabeled, reframed, or erased from institutional memory, not through conspiracy, through attribution, through the assumption that whoever occupies a structure must have built it, through the gradual replacement of one story with another until the original context is no longer retrievable. The evidence begins with the photographs themselves. Between 1850 and 1890, tens of thousands of glass plate and albumen prints were produced across the United States, Canada, Australia, and Europe. Many are stored in public archives. Many have been digitized. When examined chronologically and geographically, a pattern emerges. The earliest images of major cities, mining towns, and territorial capitals frequently show large, multi-story stone or brick buildings already standing in locations that had been surveyed wilderness only 15 to 20 years before. San Francisco in 1856, Denver in 1865, Melbourne in 1860. These cities had formal founding dates within living memory of the photographs. Yet the buildings in frame are not wooden provisional structures. They are neoclassical institutions, arcaded commercial rows, and rail terminals built from quarried stone with load-bearing walls 3 feet thick. They look identical in design vocabulary to structures in Boston, London, and Paris, but the towns around them were allegedly founded by miners. farmers and speculators arriving by wagon or ship, carrying little more than tools and canvas.
The engineering required for these buildings is not trivial. A 3-story stone building with arched windows, a slate roof, and a symmetrical facade requires foundation work, scaffolding, hoisting equipment, kilns for brick or access to quarried stone, glass production or import, ironwork for window frames and support beams, and skilled masons, glaziers, carpenters, and laborers working in coordinated teams for months or years. The California Gold Rush began in 1848. By 1856, San Francisco had multiple stone banks, a customs house, a mint, and a multi-block commercial district built in ashlar masonry. The population was transient, the government was new, the infrastructure was already there. No construction photographs exist. The explanation given is that it was built quickly using wealth from the gold economy. But wealth does not teach masonry, it does not quarry granite. It does not produce the institutional planning required to align a street grid with a water system and a deep water port in under a decade. What makes the issue more difficult to dismiss is that this pattern repeats. It is not isolated to one city or one region. Across the western United States, across Canada, across colonized Australia and New Zealand, the same sequence appears in the photographic record. Official city founding date, population explosion, professional architecture already in place. In many cases, the buildings photographed in the 1860s were destroyed soon after, during fires that swept through American cities with unusual frequency and intensity between 1871 and 1906. The Great Chicago Fire, the Boston Fire, the San Francisco earthquake and fire, Baltimore, Seattle. After these events, new buildings rose in the same locations, and those are the buildings we credit to industrialization. But the buildings that burned were often older, larger, and more ornate. They appear in illustrations and photographs before the fires. They vanish afterward, and the records describing who built them, when, and with what funds are frequently incomplete or missing entirely. Consider the United States Capitol building. Construction officially began in 1793. The dome we recognize today was completed in 1866. But photographs from the early 1860s, during the Civil War, show the building nearly finished, with workers installing the final exterior iron plates on the dome. The engineering required to lift and assemble a cast iron dome weighing 9 million pounds in the middle of a civil war, using steam-powered cranes that had only recently been invented, is remarkable. It is not impossible, but it is also not typical of wartime priorities. Meanwhile, other photographs from the same period show government buildings, courthouses, and state capitals across the fractured nation, all built in the same neoclassical style, all appearing complete or near complete during a period of political collapse. The official explanation is that construction continued regardless, that the government prioritized symbolic architecture, that the projects had been funded earlier. But when you compare the scale of these projects to the fiscal reality of the 1860s, the numbers become difficult to reconcile. The federal budget in 1860 was approximately $63 million. A significant portion was spent on military costs. Yet enormous infrastructure projects appear across the country in the same decade, many in states that had not yet been formally admitted to the Union. One way to test the hypothesis is to examine the records of construction contracts, labor logs, and material sourcing. These records should exist. Large public buildings require public funding, and public funding requires documentation. In many cases, that documentation does not exist, or exists only in summary form written decades after the fact. The architects credited with designing these buildings often have sparse biographical records. The construction firms listed in later histories are sometimes untraceable in contemporary business directories. What remains are the buildings themselves, and photographs of the buildings, and a narrative that assigns their creation to the decade in which they were photographed, not because of documented evidence, but because there is no earlier framework in which to place them. The assumption is circular. We know they were built in the 19th century because they appear in 19th century photographs. But appearance is not the same as origin. There is a counter-argument, and it is worth taking seriously. The industrial capacity of the mid-19th century is well documented. Steam engines, railways, mechanized looms, iron foundries, and coal mining operations were widespread by 1850. Engineering manuals, patent records, and trade publications from the period describe in detail how materials were produced and how buildings were constructed. Photographic evidence of construction does exist for some projects, particularly railroads, bridges, and canals. There is no need to propose an earlier lost civilization when the tools and systems of the 19th century were clearly sufficient to produce the infrastructure we see. The absence of construction photographs may simply reflect the fact that photographers focused on finished subjects, not ongoing work. The lack of detailed financial records may reflect poor archiving practices, fires, or institutional neglect. The timeline may be tight, but it is not broken.
What this explanation does not address is the simultaneity. It does not explain why so many large, architecturally identical buildings appear across vast distances in newly founded towns within the same narrow time frame. It does not explain the stylistic unity. Neoclassical's architecture, with columns, domes, and symmetrical facades, appears in California and Australia and South Africa and Canada during the same decades. In regions with no established schools of architecture, no multi-generational craft guilds, and populations that were still largely nomadic or agricultural. The explanation that this reflects shared European influence is accurate, but incomplete. Influence requires transmission. Transmission requires time, training, and institutional continuity. What the photographs show is not gradual influence, they show replication. Identical design languages appearing in disconnected places, executed at scale, with no visible precedent and no surviving visual record of the labor required to achieve them. Another layer of the problem becomes visible when you examine what happened immediately after these structures were photographed. Beginning in the 1870s and accelerating through the early 20th century, many of these buildings were demolished, burned, or replaced. In some cases, the explanation is urban renewal. In others, it is disaster, but the frequency is unusual. Major American cities experienced large, uncontained fires during this period at a rate that exceeds statistical probability, particularly given that many of these buildings were made of stone, not wood. Stone does not burn, but stone buildings can be gutted, and once gutted, they are often demolished rather than repaired. After the fires, new buildings rose. Those buildings were credited to named architects, documented construction firms, and traceable material supply chains. The narrative of industrialization aligns much more cleanly with the post-fire reconstruction than it does with the pre-fire architecture. What changed was not the capacity to build. What changed was the record. There is also the question of the world's fairs. Between 1851 and 1915, more than 20 major international expositions were held in cities across Europe, the United States, and beyond. These events featured temporary pavilions, exhibition halls, and display structures built from steel, glass, and plaster, many of which were larger than permanent government buildings. The official story is that these structures were constructed in months, displayed for a season, and then demolished. Photographs confirm this cycle, but the same photographs also reveal something else. Many of the exposition buildings were architecturally indistinguishable from the permanent infrastructure around them. Same materials, same design, same scale. The primary difference was that exposition buildings were always documented during construction,